My father was sitting in the very last row of my backyard wedding, checking his watch, when his own boss walked across my lawn, shook my groom's hand, and bowed. Actually bowed. What on earth had just happened? And why did my father, who had called my wedding a little backyard party, suddenly look like he'd seen a ghost? "Sir," the man said, his voice carrying clearly over the sudden silence, "I didn't know she was marrying you." My father, Arthur Miller, half stood up from his white folding chair, his knees still bent, caught somewhere between sitting and standing. For one long, agonizing second, the man who had always been so meticulously composed, the man who'd spent his entire life perfecting his public face, simply forgot how to use it. His jaw hung slack. His eyes were wide. The carefully constructed world he'd built for himself had just imploded, right there on my perfectly manicured lawn. Honestly, my family had almost skipped the whole thing. My mother, Susan, had actually checked the maybe box on my RSVP card. Maybe? For her only daughter's wedding. But here's the thing you need to understand. That handshake, that jaw-dropping bow from his CEO, wasn't even the part that truly broke my father. What he did next, later that night, at his own daughter's reception under the string lights I had painstakingly hung myself, that's what really cracked him. And what I said back to him, the words I took me 33 years to learn how to say. I work nights, usually in an intensive care unit. That means most of my life is spent watching numbers on monitors, deciding which ones matter and which ones don't. 11 years of that teaches you things about people. It taught me that panic is loud, but competence is quiet. It also taught me exactly which one my family respected, and trust me, it wasn't the quiet kind. I live in my grandmother Clara's farmhouse now, about 40 minutes outside the city, at the end of a gravel road with a mailbox that leans like it's tired. Clara left it to me 2 years ago. The house, a barn, an ancient oak tree older than the county, and a porch swing that squeaks on the upswing no matter what I do to it. I spent 2 years of night shift paychecks bringing that house back. I sanded the floors myself. Learned plumbing from a manual and, honestly, profanity from the plumbing. Every summer of my childhood happened in that yard. Snapping beans on the porch, catching fireflies in jam jars, falling asleep to Clara humming in the kitchen. She was the only person in my family who never once asked me what I was going to do next. She just asked if I was happy. And then she actually waited for the answer. I still have her last voicemail saved. I've never told anyone what's in it. My parents visited the farmhouse exactly once after I finished the renovation. My mother, Susan, kept her coat on the whole time, like the house was nothing more than a waiting room. My father, Arthur, walked the property line, did some quick math in his head, and then informed me what an acre was going for closer to the city. That was his entire review. I'd spent 2 years rebuilding the one place I'd ever been loved without conditions, the only place that truly felt like home, and he'd priced it per square foot. Right then, I should have understood what my wedding was truly going to cost me, and it wasn't in dollars. It was going to be in something I'd been paying my whole life, without ever once seeing the bill. For 15 years, every Sunday at exactly 7 o'clock, I called my parents. I called it the report call in my head, though I never dared say it out loud. My mother would put me on speaker, and my father would pepper me with questions from across the kitchen, like a man reviewing a quarterly filing. What are your hours now? Any overtime? Did you apply for that supervisor thing? When I made charge nurse at 30, the youngest on my unit, I might add, I told them on a Sunday, just like always. There was a pause so long and heavy, I swear I could have parked a Chevy truck in it. Then my dad finally spoke. That's not management though, is it? That was the entire celebration. My mother, Susan, then chimed in, adding that her friend Brenda's daughter had just gotten something called a director title at an insurance company. Did I know her? And wasn't that just wonderful? I need to be clear about something here, because it matters for everything that comes later. I wasn't some naive woman, waiting for them to change. I'd seen the pattern since I was a kid, bringing home an A- and being asked about the minus. Somewhere in my 20s, I'd started calling them the committee in my own head, because that's what talking to them felt like. Presenting evidence to a panel that had already decided the applicant was borderline. I'd built my life so it didn't depend on their verdict. My own house, my own money, my own name on my own mortgage. I'd stopped taking a dime from my father when I was 24. But I kept making the call. Every Sunday. 7 o'clock. One week, years back, I skipped it, just to see what would happen. By Wednesday, my mother had already told aunts and a cousin that I was going through something and hiding it from the family. It was just easier to file the report. That's the trap nobody warns you about with families like mine. They don't lock you in. They just make the door so incredibly expensive that you keep deciding tomorrow's the day you'll finally pay it. Then I met a man who didn't ask for reports. I met Samuel Olson at a Build Mart on a Tuesday. We both had a hand on the last decent piece of red oak in the lumber aisle. He looked at my cart, brackets, wood filler, a level, and, with a small smile, let go of the board. "You've got a project," he said. "I've just gotta have it." He helped me tie it down in the parking lot. And when I couldn't get the knot right, he didn't just snatch the rope out of my hands. He just said, calmly, "Other loop first, and then let me do it." I remember thinking, a man who can watch you struggle without grabbing the wheel is rarer than people think. He drove a Chevy pickup that was old enough to have opinions. He wore flannel like it was a uniform. When I finally asked him what he did for work, about 3 dates in, he just shrugged. "I move money around for people. It's less interesting than your job. And here's the part you have to understand about me. I didn't dig. My entire childhood was spent watching my mother triangulate what everyone made, what everyone drove, what everyone's kitchen remodel cost. I had sworn I would never run a background check on love. He paid his half. He fixed my gutters in the rain. He showed up. That was my data. That was enough." 2 years later, on a crisp October evening, he walked me out to Clara's old oak tree. He went down on one knee in the wet grass and said the only vow that ever mattered to me. "I've seen you at 4 in the morning after you've lost a patient. I'm not asking for the version of you that performs. I'm asking for that one." I said yes, right there, under that oak tree. 8 months later, I got married under what was left of it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My family hadn't even gotten their turn at him yet. Oh no. They were about to get their turn. We announced the engagement at my parents' house over pot roast. Some mistakes you make on purpose, with your eyes wide open, out of hope. My mother's first move was to take my hand, tilting the ring toward the chandelier like a jeweler appraising a gem. "Oh," she said, her voice dripping with careful observation, "it's dainty." My father's first move was to lean back, cross his arms, and ask Samuel, "So, what exactly do you do?" Samuel, ever calm, just said, "Consulting, mostly investments." My father waited for more. There wasn't any more. So he turned to the television and started talking about a golf tournament. In Arthur Miller's language, that means the witness had been dismissed. Then I said the word. "Backyard." "We're getting married in June," I announced, "at the farmhouse under Clara's oak. 60 guests. Dinner at long tables on the lawn." The silence in that dining room had texture to it. My mother slowly set down her fork. She smiled the smile she reserves for waiters who have gotten her order wrong, the one that makes you feel like you've personally offended the entire culinary industry. "A little backyard party," she purred. How rustic. "A little backyard party." She said it the way you'd say, a nice little hobby or a starter home. The diminutive doing all the work. My father didn't even look away from the golf. He just said, "Olsonstone Country Club books out a year in advance." I could make a call. Mark Jensen's daughter got married there. It was, quote, appropriate. I learned 2 things at that table. 1, my father had already imagined my wedding, and it had absolutely nothing to do with me. It was a venue with his colleagues in it. 2, he'd apparently been planning that imaginary wedding for a while because he knew Olsonstone's booking window off the top of his head. We left early. In Samuel's Chevy, he was quiet for a mile. Then he said, "Your mom put her coat on before dessert." He notices things like that. It's part of why I married him. It's also why I should have paid more attention to the things he never said about himself. My mother investigated Samuel the way she investigates everything, with a wine glass and a search bar. She found nothing. No profiles. No press. No company page with his headshot and a paragraph of corporate jargon. To Susan Miller, a man who can't be found online isn't private. He's hiding something, and that something is always money he doesn't have. She reported her findings to my father, who delivered the family verdict at Sunday dinner. Samuel was fixing the leaky hose bib on their own patio, unasked, 20 feet away. My father didn't lower his voice. A man with nothing to show usually has nothing. Arthur Miller has never once in his life lowered his voice for an employee's benefit. And make no mistake, that's the org chart he saw, himself at the top of the family, and this quiet, contractor-looking person somewhere below the interns. Samuel heard it. I know he heard it because the wrench paused for half a second. Then it kept turning. He never corrected them. That's the part that fascinated me and, honestly, sometimes drove me a little crazy. He'd let anyone assume anything. A neighbor once spent 20 minutes explaining index funds to him at a cookout, and Samuel just nodded along, asking polite questions like a man hearing about fire for the first time. When I asked him later why he did that, he just shrugged. Explaining yourself is expensive. I try not to shop there. I let it be. But I'll tell you the one crack of light I got months before the wedding, because you'll want it later. One night, I woke up at 2 a.m. and Samuel wasn't in bed. I found the barn light on. He was pacing on the phone, his voice low and even. 40 minutes. I only caught one sentence through the door, and it followed me back up the driveway and into my sleep. Tell the board it can wait until Monday. I stood there in my boots, thinking, what board waits for you? In February, my father fixed my wedding. That's the word he used. Fixed. I found out the way you find out most things in my family. Sideways, secondhand, already done. A woman I went to high school with messaged me, congratulations. Said her mother had heard from Mark Jensen's wife that the Miller wedding was at Olsenstone in June. And wasn't that exciting? They do the swan eye sculpture. I sat in my parked car outside the hospital, reading that message for a long time. Then the envelope came. Heavy cream paper, Olsenstone Country Club letterhead. A glossy brochure with a ballroom the color of dentures, and a photocopy of a deposit receipt. $7,500. My father had called the club, taken a June date, and put down $7,500 for a wedding he had not been asked to plan, at a venue I had said no to out loud at his own dinner table. Paperclipped to the receipt was a yellow sticky note in his block handwriting. It said, fixed it. That was the whole note. Short, block capitals. No question mark anywhere in it. My whole father distilled drink. My mother called that evening, bright as a bell, to discuss linens. Because in her mind, the argument was over. The adults had stepped in. She used the phrase, upgrade, as in, Daddy upgraded the venue. Isn't that a relief? A relief? Like my wedding had been a burst pipe. Here's what I understood, sitting at my kitchen table with that brochure. My father hadn't booked a ballroom. He'd protected a story. He had already told his office, his golf partners, and apparently the entire Jensen family that his daughter was getting married at Olsenstone, because that's the wedding a Miller daughter has, where people can see it. He didn't fix the wedding. He fixed the version of it he'd already sold. All I had to do now was refuse to be the set dressing. I drove to their house on my day off, brochure in hand, and gave it back. I was calm. 11 years in an ICU will do that. You learn that the person raising their voice is never the person in charge of the room. I said, thank you for the thought. I said the wedding was June 14th in the backyard, under Clara's oak, and that I'd love for them to be there as my parents. Then I slid the brochure across the counter. My father looked at it the way a surgeon looks at a scalpel someone has just handed back mid-operation. You're being ridiculous, Eleanor. Olsenstone is he stopped, started again. People like us don't get to be small. There it was. The Miller family motto. Said out loud for once, instead of just enforced. People like us don't get to be small, I asked him quietly, small how, Dad? And I watched the question bounce off him. He didn't have an answer prepared because no one had ever made him show his work. He just repeated himself, louder, the way people do when a belief has never been asked for ID. You'll thank me. This family has a certain, and my mother, from the doorway, in her sweetest voice, laid the second rail of the trap. We just want to be proud of you, sweetheart. Help us. Help us be proud of you. I want you to sit with that sentence, because I've been turning it over for months. Pride in that house was never something they gave. It was something you applied for with supporting documents. I left without raising my voice, which upset them more than shouting would have. At the door, my mother asked what the dress code was. For a yard, she asked and smiled like she'd dropped a glass and wanted me to hear it break. Driving home down the gravel road, I asked myself, from me to you, have you ever spent your whole life handing your family proof? Report cards, promotions, a ring, and it was never the right proof. If that sounds like a table you've sat at, tell me in the comments and subscribe. Because this story gets worse before it gets better. And the next thing it took from me, no committee could give back. My mother ran her campaign the way she sells insurance, softly, repeatedly, through third parties. Within 2 weeks, everyone in the family knew that Eleanor had turned down Olsenstone. Not that my father had booked a venue behind my back. That detail didn't make it into the newsletter. The version that circulated was that my parents had generously offered a beautiful wedding, and I had chosen, and I quote my Aunt Diane quoting my mother, to make a point in a field. My cousin Natalie, whose own wedding had 300 guests and a champagne wall, and a marriage that lasted slightly longer than the open bar, texted me, "You're so brave, LOL." No punctuation. Just brave, lol. Then came the links. My mother started sending me venue websites with the message, just to have options. A vineyard. A restored mill. Anything with a coordinator. A parking valet. Anything that wasn't Clara's yard. When I didn't bite, she escalated to sending them to Samuel, who replied to each one with a polite thumbs up, and then went back to whatever he was building in the barn. Which somehow enraged her more than an argument would have. But the slip, the one I didn't catch at the time, came on a Tuesday call when my mother, mid-lecture about how this was embarrassing your father at work, said he already told Mr. Stone's assistant his daughter's wedding would be at Olsenstone. Do you understand? Mr. Stone's office knows. I remember two things about that moment. 1. Thinking how sad it was that my father performed his family for his CEO's assistant, a woman he'd probably met twice. 2. Filing the name away the way you file the name of a medication you've never administered. Stone. It meant nothing to me. It would mean everything to my father in about 4 months, on a lawn he refused to stand on. I want to show you the other side of my life. The one with no committee in it, because you need to know who is standing in that yard in June. 3rd floor ICU. 4 a.m. My kingdom of beeps. That winter, we had a patient named Mr. Kim, 81. Congestive heart failure. A man who flirted with every nurse in 2 languages and lost ground anyway, a little every night. His family lived far away. Near the end, on one of my shifts, he held my hand with both of his, a grip like a bird, warm though, and said, "You're getting married?" "Yes," I said. "I hear them tease you." I said, "Yes, June, in my grandmother's backyard." He nodded like a man reviewing something and finding it correct. "Good. Don't wait for permission to live, honey. The permission people die too, you know. Same schedule as the rest of us." I laughed, because that's what you do at 4 a.m. so you don't do the other thing. He died on a Thursday between my shifts. I drove home, sat in the truck in my own driveway, and let the other thing happen for a few minutes. Then I went inside, and Laura, my best friend, my maid of honor, 12 years of night shifts beside me, had already texted, "You okay?" Also, I found 60 white chairs for $40. The church basement is a gold mine. I have no further questions about your venue, and neither should anyone else. That's an ally. Learn the difference. When I came in, Samuel was at the kitchen table with a folder of papers. He closed it easy, unhurried, and said, "Work boring." Then he made me eggs at 9 p.m. and let me talk about Mr. Kim until I ran out. I didn't think about the folder again for months. You will, though. Keep it somewhere. The RSVP cards came back through March like slow applause. Laura's first, obviously, with finally written under, "Accepts with pleasure." Samuel's mother, a retired schoolteacher from Tennessee, sent hers back with a recipe card for chess pie tucked in, because some families just hand you love like it's nothing, like it's a napkin. And then, on a gray Tuesday, my parents' card. I stood at the leaning mailbox and opened it right there. Under, "Accepts with pleasure," nothing. Under, "Declines with regret," nothing. My mother had drawn her own box, her actual own box in blue pen, labeled it, maybe, checked it, and added underneath, "Depends on your father's schedule." A winking semicolon on their only daughter's wedding RSVP. 60 people managed to commit to a Saturday. The 2 who made me were pending, like I was a dentist appointment. I walked back down the gravel drive, and I did something I still can't fully explain. I put that card on the refrigerator, dead center, under the magnet Clara left there, shaped like a cardinal. Not out of self-pity. Out of accuracy. I'm a nurse. I chart what's true so nobody can rewrite it later. That card was the chart diagnosis in my mother's own handwriting. When Samuel saw it that evening, he read it twice. And I watched his jaw do a small, quiet thing it does maybe once a year. Then he said, "Their seats will be there either way. Front row." That was all. In 2 years, through every dinner and every insult dressed as a question, I never once heard that man say a bad word about my parents. I used to think it was patience. Standing in that kitchen, I started to wonder if it was something else. Something closer to a man who's seen how this movie ends and doesn't want to spoil it for anyone. The last week of February, an ice storm came through and took down Clara's oak. I was at work when it happened. Samuel called at 5 a.m., which he never does, and said, "Everyone's fine. The house is fine. Come home when you can, and don't look at the yard until I'm with you." I looked at the yard. Of course, I looked at the yard. The tree that had stood over every summer of my childhood. The tree Samuel knelt under with a ring. The tree I'd planned to say my vows beneath was lying across the north fence, with its roots in the air like a thing embarrassed to be seen that way. 100 and some years, ended by one bad inch of ice. I stood in the frozen mud in my scrubs and cried in a way I don't do in front of people, which Samuel had the sense to let happen without narrating it. Grief is weather. You don't argue with it. My mother called that afternoon. I'll give you her condolences in full. Well, maybe it's a sign the yard isn't meant for a wedding. A sign? My grandmother's tree dies, and Susan Miller reads it like a horoscope that agrees with her. I said I had to go. And for once, I actually went. Here is where the story turns, though I didn't know it yet. That evening, I found Samuel out back in the cold, walking the length of the fallen trunk with a tape measure and a flashlight, muttering numbers. I asked him what on earth he was doing. He crouched, put his palm flat on the bark the way you'd steady a spooked animal, and looked up at me. The tree is not gone, he said. It's just done standing on its own. Give me 3 weekends. I didn't know what he meant. You're about to. What Samuel meant was an arch. A wedding arch cut from the heartwood of Clara's oak, built by hand in our barn over 3 weekends in March. And if you remember one object from this story, make it that arch, because every road in this family runs through it from here. We milled the trunk with a rented saw. We stacked and stickered the boards and let them breathe. Samuel worked the joints without a single screw where he could help it. Mortise and tenon. Patient, as a man saying a rosary. I sanded until my fingerprints filed complaints. Watching him work, I asked where a money mover learned joinery like that, and he was quiet a second, then said, "My dad built houses. I built something else." He didn't decorate the sentence. I didn't make him. But I want you to keep that sentence too. Next to the folder and the phone call in the barn, the pile was getting taller. On the last Sunday, with the arch assembled and standing in the barn like a doorway to nowhere, Samuel handed me a chisel. "It should have her in it," he said. So, on the underside of the crossbeam, the side that faces the ground, the side no guest would ever see, the side only the 2 people standing under it on their wedding day could ever know about, I carved a sentence my grandmother said to me when I was 15, crying on her porch about a report card of all the stupid perfect things. I'm not going to tell you what it says. Not yet. Clara earned her timing. She'd want me to respect it. We stood the arch up in the yard where the oak used to be, over the exact ground where Samuel had knelt. And from the kitchen window, it looked less like something we'd lost, and more like something that had changed jobs. 10 weeks to the wedding. That's when my father came alone up the gravel road, without my mother, without a script. He stood in the yard looking at the arch for a long time before he knocked. I watched him from the window, my 61-year-old father in his weekend blazer, hands in his pockets, reading a piece of carpentry like a document he suspected was forged. I brought coffee to the porch. He didn't sit. And then Arthur Miller told me a story I had never heard in 33 years. He was 12 when his father's hardware store went under. 1968, Millerton. Everybody knew everybody's ledger. He told me about a Christmas when the church left a food basket on their porch, and how his father made the boys carry it back up the street in front of everyone, because charity you're seen accepting is a debt that never closes. He told me about the summer he wore his cousin's shoes to school. About men calling his dad by his first name who used to call him sir. He said, "You want to know why I stayed 32 years at Peterson? Because a title is the only thing they can't repossess." For about 30 seconds, my father was a human being standing in his dead mother-in-law's yard. And I could see all the way down to the 12-year-old carrying that basket up the hill. I almost reached for his arm. But then he took an envelope out of his blazer and set it on the porch rail, and the window closed. "Olson Stone still has the date," he said. "Full refund on this backyard business if we move now. Last chance to fix this. Eleanor, don't make me choose between my daughter and my dignity." There it was. He had handed me the wound and the weapon in the same 10 minutes, and never noticed they were the same object. "People like us don't get to be small," said by a man who had been made to feel small once, at 12, and had spent 50 years filling his family for it. I didn't take the envelope. He left it on the rail like a subpoena. I sat with that envelope for 2 days. I want to be honest about that. It wasn't nothing. Watching my father finally crack open at the seam and show me why he is what he is. Understanding a person is a dangerous drug. It can make you sign anything. On the 3rd morning, after a 12-hour shift, I sat at the kitchen table with Clara's cardinal magnet watching me from the fridge, and I opened the envelope. The check inside was made out to me. $7,500. Memo line, wedding proper. Proper. I tore it in half slowly. Once. Then I put both halves in a fresh envelope with a note in my own handwriting and mailed my father the only reply his creed left room for. "The wedding is June 14th in the backyard. Come as guests, not as inspectors. I love you, Eleanor." I dropped it at the post office and sat in the truck, breathing like I'd just run a marathon. And then came Sunday. 7 o'clock arrived. And for the first time in 15 years, I didn't make the call. I sat on the porch swing with my phone face down on my knee and let 7 become 7:15. At 7:20, it started ringing. I watched my mother's name light up, and I felt for the shape of the old reflex. And here's what surprised me. It didn't feel like victory. And it didn't feel like grief either. It felt like the ICU at end of shift, when you finally take the monitor leads off a patient who's stable and the room goes quiet. And the quiet is the good news. The phone rang out. The porch creaked on the upswing. Somewhere in the dark yard, the arch stood over its patch of ground like it was keeping the appointment for me. The old life, the reports, the committee, the applications for pride, all of it ended right there, between rings. There was no getting it back after that. I knew it. So did they. The family responded the way a body responds to infection. Heat, swelling, and pressure on the site. Aunt Diane called to tell me I was breaking my mother Susan's heart, and that family is family. That's a sentence that has ended more spines than any disease I've ever nursed. My cousin Natalie unfollowed me, which in her currency is a declaration of war. A cousin I hadn't spoken to since a funeral texted a paragraph about respect with no punctuation and 3 prayer emojis. My mother left voicemails in escalating genres. Wounded. Brisk. Legal adjacent. Then wounded again. I saved them all right next to Clara's last message, just for contrast. My father, Arthur Miller, went silent. Total. And I'll admit it to you here, because this story is no good if I lie in it. His silence worked on me in a way the noise didn't. Noise is easy to triage. Silence is the reading you can't get a number on. Some nights, I'd stand at the fridge, looking at that maybe box and feel 6 years old again, a report card clutched in my hand. That's the thing about walking out of a courtroom you grew up in. The courtroom doesn't chase you. It just stays lit and open and lets you wonder. Laura, my best friend, found me like that one night mid-shift, staring at the vending machine like it owed me testimony. And she said the thing that got me to June. You're not losing family, Eleanor. You're finding out its terms. Those are different injuries. Write that on something. 6 weeks out from the wedding, the seating chart still had 2 question marks in the front row. A box on my fridge said, maybe. And my father hadn't spoken to me since that day on the porch. Quick question for you, before the wedding bells start ringing. Have you ever mailed something back? A check, a favor, a version of yourself? Just to keep your spine? If you have, or you wish you had, put the word returned in the comments below. I read every single one. And subscribe if you're staying for the wedding, because you'll want to see exactly who walks across that lawn, and what a 15-degree bow does to a man who spent 32 years perfecting his own. Trust me. Even the caterers stopped moving. Wedding week at the farmhouse looked like a barn raising run by nurses. Laura commanded the yard with a clipboard and the bedside manner of a drill sergeant on her day off. Those 60 white chairs from the church basement? Scrubbed down and lined up with hospital corners. String lights ran from the barn to the porch, hung by me, supervised by a cat that wasn't ours. Long tables were dressed in Clara's linens, which my grandmother had ironed into the afterlife, and I refused to iron again on principle. Samuel's mother, a retired schoolteacher from Tennessee, arrived 3 days early with 2 coolers and started feeding people like it was a calling. My side of the aisle was thinner. That's just the truth of it. Some chairs I didn't let myself count. Wednesday night, Samuel handed me his guest list additions. Apologetic work people, he said, a little sheepishly. Last minute. 4 of them. They'll behave. I was holding a glue gun, a seating chart, and 1/3 of a sandwich, so I read it the way you read at 2 a.m. skimming. Ellison. Grant. Whitfield. W. Stone. I taped it to the fridge next to the maybe card and went back to the centerpieces. I want that on the record. The name was on my own refrigerator for 3 days, and it meant nothing to me. Why would it? My father's office was a country I'd never been granted a visa to. I knew his CEO existed the way you know weather exists in other states. For names. One of them was about to walk across my lawn and rearrange my family's entire solar system. And I had it filed between a magnet and a casserole schedule. The night before the wedding, I checked the forecast. Clear. 74 degrees. I took the maybe card off the fridge and put it in the junk drawer. Whatever happened tomorrow, I was done displaying the evidence. The evidence, as it turned out, was about to display itself. June 14th came up clean and gold. The kind of morning that makes even a leaning mailbox look intentional. By 9, the yard smelled like cut grass and coffee. By noon, like roses and someone's grandmother's perfume. I got dressed in my childhood summer bedroom, in Clara's house, in a dress with pockets, because I'm a practical woman, and pockets are where you keep your nerve. Guests came down the gravel road in a slow, happy dust cloud. And at 12:40, 20 minutes late, a silver luxury sedan pulled in and parked at an angle that blocked two other cars, which is my father in one image. They came. I watched from the upstairs window, like a spy at my own wedding. My mother, Susan, stepped out in a dress appropriate for a governor's funeral and stood surveying the yard. And I didn't need to hear her to know what she was thinking, because I read it on her lips like a diagnosis. A little backyard party. She said it to Aunt Diane, behind her hand, with the tablecloths I'd ironed, and the chairs Laura had scrubbed, and the arch my husband built from my grandmother's tree, all standing right there in her field of view. And my father? There were 2 seats, front row, left, first position, with their names on cardstock in my own handwriting. My father walked the rows, read his card, and then guided my mother to the back row. Last row. Aisle end. Nearest the cars. He sat down, shot his cuff, and checked his watch. 20 years from now, I could draw you that watch check from memory. And here's what I decided, standing at that window in my dress, with my heart doing its own weather, it was still the best day of my life. That part wasn't up for a vote. Down on the road, one more vehicle turned in. A black SUV. Unhurried. Catching the sun. I walked myself down the aisle. That was always the plan, by the way, long before checks and RSVP boxes. I'd walked myself into every room that mattered in my life, and I wasn't going to outsource the last 50 feet. The guests stood. Somebody's toddler announced, pretty, with the confidence of a town crier, and 60 people laughed. That laugh loosened the whole yard. Samuel waited under the arch in a gray suit and his good boots, looking at me the way he looked at me across the Build-Mart lumber aisle, like I was the last decent piece of red oak in the state. We stood on the ground where he'd knelt. Above us, hidden on the underside of the crossbeam, Clara's sentence hung in the wood, and only the 2 of us knew it was there. That was its own kind of vow. The pastor from Clara's old church kept it short and warm. Samuel promised me 4 a.m. and honest work and the truth even when it's inconvenient. And his voice went rough in the middle, which undid me worse than poetry would have. I promised him I'd stop fixing things that weren't broken. And Laura snorted, and he said, she won't. And I said, I won't. And that got the biggest laugh of the day. Once. Just once. I looked at the back row. My mother was inspecting the programs. My father's eyes were somewhere over the barn roof, on the middle distance where his mind keeps its office. I let it go. I'd learned that much by June. You can't make people attend the moment they're sitting in. Then, just as the pastor got to the rings, I heard it. Polite commotion by the gate. Chairs shifting. A ripple turning heads. The last guest. Arriving late. Crossing my lawn. He came around the side of the chairs with his suit jacket over his arm, waving a small apology to the crowd, clearly intending to slide into a back seat and be nobody. And then he saw the groom. And his whole trajectory changed. He walked past the back row, past my parents, up the grass margin along the chairs to the edge of the arch where he stopped, took my husband's hand in both of his, and I will describe this exactly, because 60 witnesses can back me up. He inclined his head and shoulders in a small, unmistakable bow. Sir, he said, loud enough that the front 5 rows got it word for word. I didn't know she was marrying you. The yard went so quiet I could hear the string lights tick against the barn in the breeze. And my father, last row, aisle end, nearest the cars, rose halfway out of his chair like a man in a theater who's just seen his own house on the newsreel. Hand on the seat back, knees bent, stuck between sitting and standing. Between one version of the world and the next. Because he knew that late guest. Of course he knew him. It was Arthur Stone, Chief Executive Officer of Peterson Container Group. My father's boss. Not his supervisor. The top of the letterhead. The name on the memos. The man whose office assistant had been told months ago that the Miller wedding would be at Olsentone. Standing there, in the little backyard party, bowing to the groom, I heard the phrase travel backward through the chairs in whispers, changing tone as it went. The backyard party, the same words my mother had coined, coming back around the yard like a tide, finding its level. Beside me, Samuel returned the handshake with the same even calm he'd have given a neighbor returning a ladder. Arthur, he said. Glad you made it. We're in the middle of the good part. And Arthur Stone laughed, embarrassed, and turned to me and said the sentence that finished the job. Mrs. Olson, he said, with a little nod for the title. Brand new is the ring. Your husband is the reason 2,000 of us still have jobs. I'll find a chair now. And he did. He found a chair. And the pastor, bless him, picked the rings back up like a man resuming surgery after a fire drill. And I married Samuel Olson under my grandmother's oak, while my father sat back down in stages, like his body was buffering. The full picture assembled itself at the reception in pieces, the way truth prefers to travel. A remark from Arthur Stone here, a question from a guest there. 9 years ago, Samuel had sold his medical software company. Quietly. The year before I met him. The fund he ran now, the consulting investments, had led the restructuring that pulled Peterson Container Group out of a death spiral 3 years back. His fund held the controlling stake. He chaired the board that hired, evaluated, and could unseat Arthur Stone. My father had spent 32 years climbing a ladder, and the man he dismissed across a pot roast, the man he'd called nothing while Samuel fixed his hose bib for free, was standing above the building the ladder leaned on. When a guest asked Samuel, a little breathless, if it was all true, my husband shrugged the same shrug from our third date. It's her day, he said. Arthur can vouch for the boring parts. Get a plate. The briskets from Tennessee. That was his entire speech. My mother recalibrated in under 2 minutes. I watched it happen. An actual system reboot behind her eyes. And by the time the toast started, she was 2 tables deep into my son-in-law this, and my son-in-law that, petting the words like a show cat. And my father stood alone at the rope line of all of it, at the edge of the lawn, looking at the arch. Then he straightened his tie twice, and started across the grass toward